Berlin, March 1943. In a dim office stained by years of cigarette smoke and buried secrets, deep within Abwehr headquarters, a man sat alone with a document that would haunt him until his final breath. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of German military intelligence, a man his closest aides quietly called the conscience of Germany. He'd spent decades watching Europe through the murky lens of espionage, seen armies rise from nothing and empires crumble into dust, watched dictators swagger onto the world stage and fall into obscurity. But what lay on his desk that cold evening was different from any secret he'd ever held in his careful hands. The report described an American factory, one supposedly capable of producing a complete four-engine bomber every single hour. Not every day, not every week, every hour. The claim sounded like Allied propaganda at its most absurd, the kind of exaggeration designed to demoralize rather than inform. Yet the numbers were consistent across multiple intelligence sources, the sources themselves credible, vetted through careful analysis. It bore a name that would echo through the halls of history: Willow Run. And if the intelligence was accurate, if even half of what these pages suggested was true, the implications were nothing short of catastrophic. Canaris traced his finger down columns of meticulously compiled figures: projected output rates, labor force calculations, engine production schedules, fuel consumption estimates, raw material allocation. This wasn't fantasy dressed up as fact. This wasn't wishful thinking masquerading as intelligence. This was arithmetic, cold, precise, and utterly irrefutable. A new kind of warfare was emerging before his eyes, one where the decisive weapons weren't tanks rumbling across fields or artillery pieces thundering in the distance, but factories humming with relentless efficiency and conveyor belts that never stopped moving. This, he understood with sickening clarity, was a front line Germany couldn't afford to ignore. A battlefield where German soldiers couldn't fight. A war being waged in assembly plants, thousands of miles beyond the Reich's reach. When Canaris presented the report to his senior staff, silence fell across the room like a heavy curtain. Some whispered it was impossible, that American industry couldn't possibly achieve such output. Others insisted it was irrelevant, even if true. Germany already ruled the skies, didn't it? The Luftwaffe remained unmatched. But Canaris knew better. He'd studied too many wars, analyzed too many campaigns. He understood that victory in modern industrial conflict didn't belong to the most fanatical believers or the bravest soldiers. It belonged to the most efficient producers. And somewhere in the flat farmlands of Michigan, efficiency itself had been weaponized. Outside his window, the capital throbbed with manufactured confidence. Newspapers proclaimed imminent victory in Russia with bold headlines. Factories churned out Messerschmitts and Panzer IVs around the clock. The Führer promised a 1,000-year Reich to cheering crowds. But deep inside the intelligence apparatus, isolated in rooms where secrets lived and died, one man stared at the future and saw the ending already. Written in American blueprints and Detroit steel, Canaris hadn't survived the treacherous labyrinth of German politics by trusting appearances or believing official narratives. He was an officer of the old school, Prussian in his discipline, one who placed absolute faith in verified information, not ideological propaganda. While others celebrated territorial conquests and tactical victories, he spent his days and nights buried in intercepted cables, trade manifests, industrial surveys, shipping records. He understood something most in Berlin refused to see, couldn't afford to acknowledge: that the United States, untouched by strategic bombing and blessed with seemingly endless natural resources, was building something vast beyond German comprehension, a machine of production that couldn't be stopped by will alone. His agents reported regularly from Sweden, Switzerland, and Spain, neutral nations through which industrial secrets quietly flowed like water finding cracks in stone. A Swedish engineer wrote detailed observations of a plant assembling aircraft wings with automobile precision and speed. A diplomat in Lisbon mentioned seeing blueprints for a conveyor line longer than a battleship. A contact in Zurich forwarded photographs of components being mass-produced. Every report, Every coded message, every scrap of intelligence pointed to the same location. Willow Run, Michigan. A name that meant nothing to most Germans but everything to those who understood modern warfare. At first, the fundamental concept seemed ridiculous on its face. Ford Motor Company, the maker of Model Ts and affordable automobiles, now supposedly manufacturing heavy bombers, strategic aircraft designed for high-altitude warfare. Each B-24 Liberator required over 1 million individual components, assembled with precision. Spark plugs to hydraulic lines, oxygen masks to Norden bomb sites, gun turrets to bomb bay doors, landing gear to instrument panels. How could such an incredibly complex machine be built with the speed of a car rolling off a conventional assembly line? The complexity seemed to defy mass production. But that was precisely the genius of it, the revolutionary insight Ford had grasped. Instead of building bombers, one painstaking unit at a time with craftsmen assembling entire aircraft, Ford would break them into thousands of small, perfectly repeatable tasks. Each operation performed by a worker trained for only that specific function. No wasted motion, no unnecessary expertise. Industry distilled to its purest possible essence. Repetition, precision, unthinkable scale. To the Allies, it was American ingenuity solving an impossible problem. To Canaris, sitting in his Berlin office, it was the mathematical certainty of doom approaching on wings of aluminum. He sent his findings to the highest levels of command, marked urgent, warned explicitly that if Willow Run reached full operational capacity, it could overwhelm the entire Luftwaffe in less than a single year. But even as he carefully wrote those words, he knew the danger they carried in the current climate. In a regime that worshipped ideology above all else, cold logic was dangerous heresy. In a system carefully built on constructed lies and convenient fictions, inconvenient truth was nothing less than treason. When the report finally reached the upper echelons of Reich command, climbing through bureaucratic layers, it was greeted with dismissive laughter. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, and Hitler's designated successor waved the papers away with theatrical disdain that bordered on mockery. Americans, he sneered to his assembled staff. They make refrigerators and razor blades and toasters. They don't build real bombers. Not like German engineering produces. His aides roared with approval, eager to please. The matter was dismissed before the ink had time to dry on the pages, but behind the public laughter lived private fear. The unspoken terror of admitting their enemy might have mastered the very thing Germany once prided itself on, above all nations: industrial efficiency, precision production. The Reich still viewed war through an outdated lens as a matter of pure will, of blood sacrifice and historical destiny. Factories, manpower allocation, supply logistics, these were secondary concerns next to ideological purity and fighting spirit. They genuinely believed the German soldiers' superior spirit could overcome any industrial disadvantage, no matter how mathematically vast. Even Albert Speer, the Reich's pragmatic minister of armaments and war production, admitted in his later writings he was privately stunned by the data when he finally saw it. If these numbers were even half correct, he wrote candidly after the war from his prison cell, Germany was doomed the moment the first assembly machine switched on at Willow Run, but no one dared tell Hitler that uncomfortable truth. To question ultimate victory was defeatism, punishable by death. To suggest America could outbuild the industrial might of Germany was ideologically unthinkable. So the report was quietly buried in filing cabinets, and Canaris's name was discreetly added to the growing list of men to be watched carefully by the Gestapo. In the smoky cafes of Berlin, uniformed officers toasted military victories that no longer existed except in propaganda. Newsreel footage showed triumphant columns, fresh tanks rolling off production lines, smiling pilots climbing into cockpits. Yet in the back rooms of the Abwehr, intelligence analysts ran the production numbers again and again, hoping for different results. The calculations never changed. The war was fundamentally shifting away from courage and battlefield tactics toward raw industrial capacity. And capacity was something the Reich could no longer match or even approach. Across the Atlantic Ocean, on the flat farmlands of rural Michigan, the impossible was steadily becoming reality. The Willow Run bomber plant, designed by renowned architect Albert Kahn and financed by Henry Ford's vast fortune, became the largest single manufacturing building on Earth. It stretched over 67 acres under one continuous roof, so vast that workers genuinely joked about needing bicycles just to cross from one end to the other during shift changes. To avoid paying taxes in two separate counties, the main assembly line curved 90 degrees mid-production. A literal tax dodge that accidentally became an engineering marvel studied by industrial planners. Here, Ford's revolutionary philosophy of the assembly line was reborn on a scale never before attempted in human history. Each B-24 Liberator moved steadily down the line in carefully choreographed stages. Wings and fuselage sections joined in perfect rhythm. Four massive engines lowered into place by overhead cranes that never stopped moving. By mid-1944, 42,000 workers filled the cavernous plant during overlapping shifts. One-third were women, real-life Rosie the Riveters, stepping into roles men had abandoned for combat. Thousands were African-American, many migrating north for the first time to join the massive war effort. Farmers and teachers and housewives worked side by side with factory veterans, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The production never stopped. The sound inside Willow Run was unrelenting, overwhelming, a mechanical heartbeat pulsing with the urgent tempo of total war. The air smelled of machine oil, heated metal, and ozone from electric welders. Sparks showered from riveting stations. Pneumatic tools hammered constantly. Every 63 minutes, another complete bomber rolled out of the final hangar doors under its own power, engines running, ready for immediate flight to combat zones. For comparison, German aircraft factories needed several weeks of careful assembly to finish one comparable bomber. Ford called it mass production for freedom. Allied leaders called it the arsenal of democracy. To Canaris, watching from Berlin through intelligence reports, it was proof his worst nightmare had manifested into reality. Each new bomber meant another German city within striking range. Each factory shift, another incremental step toward inevitable collapse. In the span of one calendar year, Willow Run alone produced more heavy bombers than the entire Luftwaffe could possibly replace, even operating at maximum wartime capacity. And there was absolutely nothing the Reich could do to stop it. No amount of willpower could bomb a factory in Michigan. No tactical brilliance could sink assembly lines in Detroit. By 1944, the skies above Europe had fundamentally changed color and character. They no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe's fighters. They belonged to endless formations of four-engine bombers rising from bases in England and newly liberated Italy. Wave after wave, the sound of their massed engines was the sound of inevitability, drumming closer with each passing day. Operation Big Week in February 1944 became the proof written in fire and destruction. Over 6 consecutive days, thousands of Willow Run bombers struck directly at the heart of German industrial capacity. Factories in Regensburg, Leipzig, and Gotha vanished under rolling clouds of flame and explosive force. Aircraft assembly lines shattered into twisted metal. Synthetic fuel plants burned uncontrollably for months. The Luftwaffe's losses were absolutely staggering. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed. Irreplaceable experienced pilots killed, gone in a single devastating week. Inside Berlin, panic rippled through the corridors of power like electricity. Hitler demanded new wonder weapons to reverse the tide. The jet fighter, the V-2 rocket, the miracle that would somehow turn inevitable defeat into impossible victory. But miracles require raw materials and manufacturing capacity, and Germany was rapidly running out of both. Canaris, now increasingly isolated and alienated from leadership, knew with certainty it was over. He'd warned them clearly when they could have acted, when there was still time. Now it was far too late. The Reich had been defeated not by superior armies or brilliant battlefield tactics, but by simple arithmetic. By the overwhelming capacity of one nation's factories to massively outproduce another's increasingly desperate delusion. When Germany finally looked upward through the smoke, the sky was filled with machines that arrogance had dismissed as impossible. And below on the ground, the same factories that once openly mocked America's supposedly inferior industry now lay silent and shattered, buried under the crushing ruins of their own fatal disbelief. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris didn't live to see the peace that followed the destruction. After the failed July 20th assassination plot against Hitler, the Gestapo seized his personal diaries, written proof of his quiet opposition to the regime. He was arrested without ceremony, tried in secret tribunals, executed at Flossenburg concentration camp in April 1945, strangled slowly with piano wire as Allied forces advanced on Germany from all directions. Just weeks later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war that began with grand ideology and promises of racial supremacy ended in cold mathematics. The Allies produced over 300,000 military aircraft. Germany managed scarcely a third of that total, despite desperate efforts. Willow Run alone built nearly 7,000 Liberators, more than the Luftwaffe's entire operational bomber force during that final year. After the war ended, Willow Run quietly returned to making automobiles, its massive assembly lines humming with peacetime rhythm and civilian purpose. Today it stands as a historical relic of American industry, a monument to unprecedented scale, ruthless efficiency, and democratic determination. But its true legacy runs far deeper than statistics. It proved beyond doubt that freedom's apparent chaos could systematically outbuild tyranny's rigid order. That diversity, openly mocked as weakness by fascist ideology, could become the ultimate industrial strength. History remembers Admiral Canaris as the intelligence officer who saw the truth too early and paid with his life. Willow Run as the factory that ended the war before the generals realized it was already over. Because in the final analysis, it wasn't bombs or bullets that doomed the Third Reich. It was the stubborn refusal to believe in uncomfortable facts. And facts, unlike empires built on lies, don't die. They just wait patiently to be proven right.